What's causing leaders to hang on to the top job a bit longer these days?
They've worked hard, they've built this legacy. They really want to feel like they can hand it off to a pair of safe hands. You don't know what that safe pair of hands looks like.
It's got to be hard to go from being really at the top to trying to navigate your way again.
One invariably grows stale in the role. This is not a lifetime position. He or she needs to have an open mind.
Will they leave it or lose it? Hi, I'm Jill Wiltfong, Chief Marketing Officer for Korn Ferry, and this is Briefings, our deep dive into topics that corporate leaders need to care about. You've probably seen all the headlines, how CEOs are leaving in record numbers. Some are leaving of their own accord, some forced out by boards or activists. We dedicated a whole episode, in fact, on the pressures CEOs face. But today we thought it might be interesting to talk about an opposite problem that persists at some firms, the CEO who just won't leave. The issue seems to be particularly acute for older leaders, with one study finding that succession rates for those aged 64 and older dropped by 8% last year. And on balance, despite all the exits that other CEOs are making, CEO tenure has nudged up in the past 2 years. There may be good reason some CEOs overstay their welcome, but too often it can slow down a firm's progress as well as the career paths of those waiting in the wings. So let's take a look at the issue of CEO legacy. Will they leave it or lose it? Before we start, if you're watching us on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let us know your thoughts on this topic. I'm joined today by Janet Feldman, a senior client partner in Korn Ferry's CEO succession practice. She works very closely with company leaders and has some deep insight into their comings and goings. So Janet, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jill.
Take me into the psyche of the moment. What's causing leaders to hang on to the top job a bit longer these days as compared to previous years?
The first dilemma I would call the safe hands dilemma. You know, they've worked hard, they've built this legacy, they've built this organization, they poured a lot into it, and they really want to feel like they can hand it off to a pair of safe hands. Mm-hmm. And these days, you know, some of the things you already quoted, Jill, with all of the geopolitical dilemmas, technological, environmental, they don't know what that safe pair of hands looks like. The other dilemma, which is pretty common, is that they haven't done adequate life planning for themselves. And so a lot of times they poured so much into their work lives that they haven't thought about what's after this act.
Are there some early warning signs that a CEO may have stayed on a bit too long that perhaps they themselves, their board members, their leadership team should keep an eye out for?
One is there's a code word out there. And there's a code that says, you know, we need modern leadership. I think modern leadership has become a code for there's a little bit of stagnation in the C-suite. I think boards can be complicit in some of this. They like the steadiness of the longstanding relationships that they have with CEOs, and so they don't often ask the difficult questions about whether a new leader is needed. And then I think that there's a cultural piece too, that they stay too insular. And the better the culture, the more insular they stay. And I think that they need to change out members of the C-suite regularly.
Know that we have divided in three our kingdom. 'Tis our past intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we, unburdened, crawl toward death.
That is a scene from the movie adaptation of Shakespeare's King Lear, where Sir Anthony Hopkins, as King Lear, willingly abdicates his throne in favor of his three daughters. So Janet, in the business world, it seems leaders aren't quite as willing maybe to let go. So tell me, when you get into a situation with an overly long tenured CEO, what's the best way for firms to go about transitioning them out without ruffling too many feathers or causing too much disruption? Should they be setting CEO term limits maybe right off the top, like they do from board of directors? Or are there other things that can happen to help kind of mitigate the risk and the disruption?
It's a little bit like a Rubik's Cube, where I think you have to move the pieces around them a little bit to make sure that it's easy for them to do that. You have to be very rigorous in development of the pipeline and in creating rotations for people around them to demonstrate their capabilities. And that also helps to mitigate that safe hands dilemma, because then the CEO can see that maybe they can take this, and maybe they can bring some new ideas and even shake things up in a way that helps us all.
You've had a lot of experiences. I'd love to kind of hear some of those personal experiences. Have you ever had to talk to a leader about stepping down? And if so, maybe give us a sense of kind of how those conversations have gone.
It is about talking about them with them about what they might do afterwards and what boards they might serve on or how they might create a portfolio life. And then it's also about talking up, their successors and talking about, we're often brought in to develop their successors. And those are the times to really help the CEO see and read between the lines that there are some topics that they may not be equipped to really take forward.
So before you go, I'd like to touch on one of the other major consequences of leaders staying too long. You mentioned a link between our own Korn Ferry Institute data showing as much as 50% of Gen Z workers claiming to be disengaged from their jobs, and this current trend in CEOs overstaying, that there's a potential connection there. Tell me a little bit more about that.
One of the things that younger people, we've got 5 generations in the workforce, as you know, and as you've covered, and they're looking for development opportunities. They're looking for growth opportunities. And if people stay enrolled too long, they're occupying a seat that somebody else should be occupying for development purposes. And that creates a pipeline issue all the way down. So you have flight risk with those people because they see options elsewhere. And with high potential talent really in demand, there are always options.
It's challenging. It's people, personalities, personal needs and fears and everything coming into play.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insider take on this very trending issue. We'll certainly keep watching it and see where it heads.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks for the time.
We've looked at what companies can do when the leaders don't leave. After the break, we'll talk to a former CEO who did step away on his own and hear his thoughts on how to do it the right way. Stay with us.
Hi, and welcome to This Week in Leadership. I'm Rupak Bhattacharya, and here's a quick look at what else is happening in business.
For some youth, it might be a bit harder finding a job right now.
The unemployment rate for Americans aged 20 to 24 is 8.2%, nearly 2 percentage points higher than it was 2 years ago. Experts say the reason is that there are fewer jobs available these days than even a few years earlier, and more older workers are putting off retirement, making the job pool even smaller.
It can be very difficult to disconnect from work.
Researchers at USC found that managers consistently rated employees who unplugged from work after hours or while on vacation as both less committed and less promotable. So even though many leaders aim to promote work-life balance, the study uncovers a potential unconscious bias that could discourage transparency between employee and manager.
Hey, do you have a Monday morning meeting?
Nearly half of respondents in a new Korn Ferry poll think Mondays are too early in the week for meetings. Experts say managers often prefer Monday meetings as there are fewer distractions at the start of the week, and Monday meetings can help employees get into work mode after the weekend. For more insights, turn to This Week in Leadership on our website. Now back to Jill and our episode, Legacy. Leave it or lose it.
Today does not mark the end of our country's first democratic government, nor does it bring to an end the term that I have the profound privilege to be serving as president. The business of government continues for some months to come.
We're back talking about CEOs overstaying their welcome. And with us now is Paul Latacina, former CEO at Carney and author of Wall Street Journal bestseller Roadmap to a Brighter Future. Paul, thanks for joining me.
Great to be with you, Jill.
So, Paul, that last clip featured Nelson Mandela giving one of his final speeches as South Africa's president. he very famously, right, opted not to take a second term, relinquishing power for what he believed to be the greater good. When you were CEO, your firm also had a 2-term limit. And I'm told a couple of partners actually came to you near the end of your second term and said, we wanted you to change the charter so you could stay on for a third. And you said, no, thanks.
Right.
That is not an easy thing to do. What caused that decision?
I think after a period of time, one invariably grows stale in the role. And even if you're performing well by all conventional standards, the fact of the matter is a CEO, especially in this convulsive change environment that we're in today, needs to have good peripheral vision. And that peripheral vision tends to get dulled over time when one is an incumbent in a leadership position of any kind.
It's got to be hard to go from being really at the top to trying to navigate your way again. So many CEOs, I imagine, do find themselves at this loss. Certainly, I've got to imagine the phone stops ringing, slows down from ringing the day after you leave that C-suite.
Right.
From your experience, what's the best thing a leader can do to avoid falling into that maybe kind of disappointing lull of a mental space?
Well, I think that one needs to actually prepare in a very intentional way for what one might be doing after one leaves the C-suite. And that's where I think pausing and spending time to understand what your special purpose is and how that purpose might be applied to the next chapter in life is very important. And it's often difficult for a CEO who is running in the fast lane to stop and think about the future when you are so captivated and captured by the present.
So sales are down?
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, that's what it right now looks like.
I got an idea. It's a spicy chip. It's gonna change everything. It will save our factory. And you're a janitor. Okay, no, hang on.
What we just saw was a scene from the movie Flamin' Hot, based on the true story of how a janitor and a CEO helped innovate the now wildly popular Flamin' Hot Cheetos snack. Paul, you've talked about how innovations like these are the result of companies having sufficient, what you call peripheral vision, but that's something that I imagine can often get hindered with long-tenured leaders. Elaborate on that a little bit for me.
I think the longer one is in the CEO role, the easier it is to fall prey to the so-called hidden traps of decision-making, where because we've done it this way in the past and succeeded, that's the way we do it in the future. And that doesn't work very well, especially in this age of continuous pervasive change, because things that relate to the theory of business are in a steady state of change. And so the longer one's in the role, the more difficult it is to be aware of those changes, and the more important it is for one to build in the kind of diversity of input that comes when there's a change in leadership.
So given all of this, why don't we end on your best advice? Best advice you have for how to avoid the problem of lingering leaders. Is it setting term limits, annual board reviews? What do you think is the answer here?
Well, I think the board in the recruitment process needs to be very clear with the incoming CEO that they're recruiting them to do a job and that this is not a lifetime position. And in fact, there should be, I think, important thresholds where there is a review both of the CEO's performance, to be sure, but also the company's performance and future, dynamics. So I think getting the terms of reference right from the beginning are exceedingly important, and being sure that the CEO that you recruit understands that he or she needs to have an open mind about why having a refreshed HR resource pool where you move people up the chain, including vacating the office of CEO, is something which happens in the most competitive and dynamic of corporate environments.
I love it. It's bold. It's a bold move. We'll see if others follow, but it certainly has worked out, I think, quite well for Kearney and a lot of other companies that are employing that approach. Really good to have you on today to get your perspective. Appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
The executive producer of Briefings is Jonathan Dahl. Today's episode was produced by Rupak Bhattacharya and Zachary Dorr. It was edited by Jaron Henry McRae. It contains reporting by Russell Perlman, Ariane Cohen, and Peter Loria. Our video segment contains original artwork by Fraser Milton, Haley Kennel, Jonathan Pink, and Sasha Kotschik. Don't forget to read our magazine, available at newsstands and at kornferry.com/briefings. That's it for Korn Ferry Briefings. I'm Jill Wiltfong. See you next time. Or perhaps CMOs who overstay their welcome. That's what you really want me to say, right?